There is a topic that Keith Costas is very passionate about.
What is Venus?
No, not Venus. We're talking about the Hall of Fame, and the announcement show is coming up on Tuesday. Can't believe we are inside of a week of learning who'll make out the class of 2024. Live coverage right here on MLB Network starting that afternoon at 4 Eastern, the announcement itself to follow.
Are you going to be there?
I'll be here.
Oh, okay.
I think the only guy that goes up there is Brian Kenny, and I think Morosi goes up there because they like to frolic in the snow. We have video proof of that. Maybe we'll roll that later if we have an opportunity. But for now, let's get it to Keith to talk about one of the names on the ballot, a couple of them, as a matter of fact, one of whom Anthony played with. I was in Tucson in '96 when this guy was starting his career as a AAA minor leaguer. D-Row played with him.
I played with Bobby Abreu in Caracas.
Right, in Caracas. Let's talk about Bobby Abreu.
Yeah, guys, one of the most polarizing players that has a legitimate chance to make it to the Hall of Fame on this ballot. And we'll start with what I think is a good illustration of the crux of the issue here. You look at those top numbers, the sabermetric numbers, sabermetrically inclined, as Harold might say, Matty. And he stacks up with some of the great players in the history of the game at right field.
Front office who's sabermetrically minded.
Correct. Not as much so as when he actually played, but now that's certainly the case. Now, those bottom three lines, that illustrates, obviously, the more old-school case. Was never a top 10 MVP candidate, only 2 All-Star games, and his voting debut reflected it as such. Barely stayed on the ballot with just 5.5%. Now, let me give you some reasons why you might want to reconsider his candidacy, starting with the most simple statistic of all, games played. Take a look at this list, the last 12 players that got to the total that Abreu did. Just being able to stay on the field for that many games gives you a pretty good indication of how talented of a player he was. Abreu had wrist surgery in his second year, never went on the IL again in his entire career. Now, how about how he started his career here, guys? Taking a look at WAR. This is his first 7 full seasons, north of 5 WAR in all 7 of them. Guys who put up 7 seasons like that before age 30, there's been 37 of them in the history of the game. 4 of them are playing right now, Pujols, Miggy, Trout, and Mookie. 30 of them are in the Hall of Fame, and 3 are not. The 3 that aren't, Bonds, A-Rod, and Abreu. Pretty impressive list when you talk about putting up those kind of numbers right out of the chute. How about guys to match his slash line average on-base slugging percentage?
I love history.
Well, there's 10 of these guys, and Bonds is the only one other than Abreu who wasn't in the Hall of Fame. The stat that gets thrown around a lot to illustrate that, big on-base guy. Fewer plate appearances than Tim Raines and Tony Gwynn. More times on base than both of them. And guys, this is the one that I'll leave you with to react. If you could transport Bobby Abreu to present day, and you told every GM that this is what he's going to do over the next 14 seasons, what kind of contract is this guy getting?
Everybody would have signed it in blood.
I think you can make a case that Bobby Abreu in today's game, with these kind of numbers over that type of time period, 14 years, you're talking about like a $400 million player. So to me, you can't go back and penalize guys from previous generations that maybe don't stack up to the modern standard. If a guy didn't get on base, hit for a higher average, that's the way the game was played then. But if we can go back and look at guys that were maybe undervalued in retrospect, I think it's worth reconsidering, and Abreu is a good example of that to me.
Yeah, boy, this is a tough one, man. For the reasons you lay out, an extreme skill set, man. He was a great pure hitter. He played a long time. As an accumulator, he was very much a candidate. Was he ever a one-man band, high-profile, super-duper star, Cooperstown destined player? Probably not, but at the end of his career, the body of work does make you think really hard about it.
Well, I think what I love about Bobby, getting to play with him in 2014, it was his last year. And what you're saying echoes kind of the type of guy that I saw. Quiet in the clubhouse, hard worker, just went about his business every single day in such a professional manner. He had a presence in the clubhouse without saying words. You just love to be around him. You love to watch what he did. A true professional day in and day out. And guys like that, I love. I think they have a place not only obviously in the game, but in the Hall of Fame. Whether or not Bobby makes it or not, I don't know. I think playing against him, playing with him, and watching his career unfold the way it did. I didn't realize he had so many stolen bases, by the way. But just an incredible person to be around. really a love of not just baseball, but of life. He was one of those kind of happy guys. Every time you saw him, he just always had a smile on his face, always doing something, to make the people around him better. Just a really good person. And so to me, I loved being around him. I hope he gets every opportunity to be a part of the Hall
we
of
could
Fame.
also have the same exercise where you line up his numbers and do it as comparison to Hall of Fame players. You could also do that exercise with players that are in the Hall of Very Good. And there's nothing wrong with the Hall of Very Good. And maybe for a lot of voters, that's where they think Bobby Abreu should be. I'm glad I'm not a voter in this case because this would be a very difficult case. I just think it's interesting. He's played with just about everybody that works here.
I played with him up in Alaska one summer.
No, you didn't, except for Harold. He never played with Harold. Let's move on. Carlos Beltrán is another really interesting name on this year's ballot.
Yep, another really well-rounded player. We didn't think his candidacy would be too polarizing, but debuted at just under 50%. I think what happened with the Astros probably has something to do with that, but he looks like he's heading to Cooperstown eventually. Look at the overall resume here, guys. One of the most well-rounded players that we've ever seen. One of just 8 with 300 and 300 in terms of home runs and stolen bases. Obviously, being a switch hitter was a big part of his game. And what everyone remembers is just how he dominated in the postseason. Some of the best postseason numbers we've ever seen, and eventually did get over the hump with the 2017 Astros. He wasn't just well-rounded, guys. He was efficient in how he went about it. You look at his stolen base percentage among players that attempted at least as many steals as he did, and he's the best in the history of the game, 86%. We know he was a switch hitter, talked about that too. It wasn't like he was better at one side of the plate than the other. He's one of the most balanced switch hitters, at least in terms of high-performing switch hitters in the history of the game. You take a look at this next board in terms of the split between his left-handed OPS and his right-handed OPS.
We got that full screen built.
Well, it's right there on the screen, Harold. We do have it built. Only Jorge Posada had a smaller split between left and right among some of the best switch hitters in the game. And we talked about the postseason, Maddie. As a St. Louis guy, I certainly got to see this up close on both sides. How about versus the Cardinals in those two series where he really established himself as a postseason legend? OPS north of 1,200, comes to the Cardinals, continues that great performance. Later in his career, maybe not quite as dominant in the postseason, but ended up getting the ring at that point with the Astros.
The whole on-base thing, it's hogwash.
Well,
in a
Harold,
sense.
that's a perfect segue, actually, because how about just some old school numbers? Center fielders that drove in 100 and scored 100 in the same season. Only the great Willie Mays did it more often than Beltran. So, like we said, debuted at under 50%, trending up. I would be surprised if Beltran doesn't get in this year or next year at the very latest.
There's a lot of good-looking dudes in baseball.
It's a personal opinion, but I guess that's part of his candidacy as well.
Lots of hot takes, man. These are two of the toughest names on the ballot for a lot of the voters. And again, we're less than a week away from learning who makes out the class of 2024.